want to talk a little bit about the background to the play. What is the overall gestalt, whatever, what is the overall tone, the tenor, what's going on? How do you feel when you watch this play? What is the spirit of the play, if you get what I'm driving at? Let's start with that. Tension. What kind of tension? Get in the mindset of the audience member in that audience. They have no clue about where the play is going. They have a clue about the myth, maybe, but the game, the suspension of disbelief game that goes on, is that you as an audience member don't know what the hell is happening. That's the power of each little leg of the play, giving you one tiny little piece of information at a time. So if I didn't already say that, buy into the suspension of disbelief. Do not let your interpretations of the play, at the very least, gravitate around your already knowing the story, let alone even being influenced by it very much, if at all. What kind of tension? What's the, in general, you're feeling when you read the play? What kind of tension? What is the tension based on? What is it? What is the source of the tension? You may or may not have heard from me, as well as others, that 5th century Athens, the provenance, fancy word for, social background of the plays that we're reading, all of them, except until we get into Aristophanes, the comedy guy, and that gets a little later. But as far as the tragedies go, it's 5th century Athens. In 5th century Athens, what would you say, what's the one word, those who haven't had my classes, that you would associate with 5th century Athens? What do the coffee table books say about Athens in terms of 5th century Athens is so great because they are democracy. That's the cliche. Okay, that's the cliche, is that 5th century Athens is the first and maybe only, then there are other countries looked at, including us with the representative democracy stuff, but they're the purest democracy, maybe that ever existed, but certainly the first one. Okay, what does that mean? Where did it come from? It didn't come out of nowhere, right? Athens, just like everywhere else around Greece, began with monarchy. Right? In the prehistory of Athens. Then there was an extensive one. It's very important for us to understand how monarchy turned into democracy for us to understand the kind of tension that you're talking about. Because what it is, it's law court tension. Okay? It's this, what's going on in this play is a reflection of a new development that could have only come about in a democracy. And that is regular old citizens, not women, not slaves, not other parts of the population, those who were called citizens. We won't go forever on that. You get my point, okay? Because I always put quotes around democracy when I talk about 5th century Athens. We'll call it a democracy, and what does it involve? It involves regular old citizens arguing against each other in a court of law with a large jury, much more than 12. It depends on what part you're looking at. Sometimes 100 and sometimes less, and it depends on when you're talking about, etc. But bottom line, big old jury, watching the proceedings, voting, and that's it. And that's a jury of your peers deciding on whether or not you're guilty of this and that. That's what's going on here in Sophocles. Sophocles in Oedipus the King, most famously, but in other dramas as well. Maybe you can see elements of it in all of his dramas, including the one we're getting to next, the Antigone. But way more conspicuously and famously in the Oedipus the King that you guys just read. That's the energy. It's courtroom energy. Okay, now unless you're unlike me in this way. These days, if you're a YouTube person, there's lots and lots of interesting clips from different court cases with sentences and jury. I don't know if any of you are into watching that stuff sometimes. It's interesting to see how jury system works, etc. So that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, being in a court of law and people arguing and people judging based on the argumentation. That's what's going on here, right? And so we got a taste of it in the Eumenides, didn't we? Because very famously as well, at the end of the Eumenides, the third play, the third play that we've read so far, the third of the trilogy by Aeschylus, there is that time when very heavy-handedly Orestes goes to none other than Athens, right? Athens being known all over Greece as the place that invented all this stuff, invented democracy, invented courts of law within a democracy, the jury system, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff comes right from Athens, including drama, including theater, all that stuff, all right? And there are ties between all that stuff that we'll get into later in the semester. But for now, what we need to do is just understand that the main energy, the main thrust of what's going on, the tension, was recognized, as far as we know from documentary evidence, people talking about tragedy, and to a lesser extent comedy, but especially tragedy. They understood what was going on in front of them. They understood that Sophocles had a very good understanding of the legal system, how it works. And when they're watching what's going on between Oedipus and Tiresias and various other characters in the play, they're really watching something analogous to what goes on in a court of law. Okay? And so in a way, it's an extension of Aeschylus's celebration of the legal system in Athens, this idea of Orestes going and a fair argumentation going on, and then Orestes wins, and then the Furies become the Eumenides, the well-wishing ones, because of honoring the decision by Athena with her final vote, to break the tie. Okay, so all this stuff you can't avoid understanding that the real kind of subtext to every play you watch, certainly by Sophocles, a little bit by Aeschylus, and a little bit by Euripides, depending on which play you're looking at, but really in a big way in Oedipus the King. And that's one of the things that's most famous about it, is you get the best sense of what it's like to be in a courtroom, other than through literal speeches that were delivered in the court by orators, whose works we have more of than any other genre in the ancient world. Not as an accident, because that was understood to be official documentation to record what went on in the courts and stuff like that. So we have lots and lots and lots of... And if you're interested in that stuff, email me and I'll send you some links if you want to read the actual speeches by people in courts of law, etc. But that's the gist of what we're talking about here. This is by far, the second place, there's debate. This is the most famous. This is what was considered by, as far as we could tell, most Greeks to be the greatest. When it comes to greatest, there's a little competition. Medea, maybe, whatever. But when it comes to the most famous, without a doubt, and in the modern world as well, obviously, mainly because everybody knows about the whole idea of the Oedipus Complex and that stuff. We were talking about Freud the other day. We all have heard of that stuff, the Oedipus Complex. And so it's obvious how that theory came about, why it was that Freud used this play in order to serve as a symbolic foundation for his theory of all the crazy shit that supposedly goes on in the subconscious. Hubris is one of the most important concepts from ancient Greece. Okay? And what does it mean? My big joke, my recurring joke is hubris means hubris. There are some terms that are too important to pretend that there's one or two or a million words that are perfect to describe what it means. Okay? This is one of those. It's hard to paraphrase it. It is usually translated overweening pride, W-E-E-N. So overdone pride, way too much pride. What does that mean? It requires a dissertation, and there are dissertations and books and articles written about hubris to get across the depths of what it really is getting at. But from what I can gather over the decades of being enthusiastic about this stuff, my overall sense is this, and I'm not inventing this, it's written in various places, that it has to do with a human being, a mortal, behaving as though they think they're more than mortal. That's the bottom line. It's really letting your sense of mortality be in denial enough about it to where you start acting as though you are better than other mortals by virtue of what you're doing in a social context. Look around. Okay. Newsflash. We love him, but Bieber is going to die. We love him, right? We all love him, right? Okay. Whatever. Bieber's okay, right? I kind of like that guy. But anyway, any of these celebrity, Howard Stern, right? Yes, he's on top of the world and makes $100 million a year or whatever. It's all good for you. He's gonna die. That's what hubris is. Hubris is the Greeks saying, I don't care what kind of power. It's usually power that you're talking about in ancient Greece more than money, because they didn't have as much of a money culture and lives of the rich and famous kind of vibe to them that we do now. Nor did the Romans, by the way, that much, except for their villas and stuff like that. But that's the idea. You think you're all that because of all the acclaim you get within society. Well, I got news for you. 100 years from now, none of us are going to be around. That's the vibe about hubris. Okay. I hope you like the Aeschylus movie stuff. I got good emails from quite a few of you, and so that was heartening. But this is even better in my opinion. You get a real sense of authenticity, the one that we're going to be watching. And what you guys are talking about with this whole hubris thing, this whole kind of haughtiness, this patronization by Oedipus. Boy, do they do it to the T. They do such a good job in this movie. So that stuff is really emphasized in a creative way in the play, and that's definitely how we should see it. Now, that's the irony y'all are talking about. That's the irony. It just gets so thick with look at me. I mean, when we watch the movie, he even does this stuff. The whole I am the king kind of stuff, and it's like yet the harder he does that, the more the irony gets thick, and the payoff from that irony. It never stops. It's just, you guys, come on. Okay, look, if you don't like this play, then you're in the wrong class, I gotta be honest with you. Because this is the best it gets. This is the best it gets when it comes to total genius, in my opinion. Now, I told you I would bring in, and I'm going to do it next time for sure, I'm bringing in Aristotle. We want to hear what he had to say, because besides being an idiot and having slaves, he was a genius intellectually. I'll stand by that. One of the greatest philosophers of all time. And so, depending on your position toward separating those things, it's hard for me, especially with art and stuff. But anyway, that's the bottom line. But when it comes to his opinion about, in his Poetics, a very famous, and for good reason, work of his, the very first work of literary theory of all time, he praises Sophocles and, in particular, Oedipus the king to the skies, and just says this is the best. Sophocles is the greatest, and this is the best play, etc. Then when we get to Aristophanes at the end of the semester, and we look at The Frogs, which is a play that deals with a competition between tragedians to decide who gets to go and save humanity by relieving Athens of their just horrible tragedies that exist in the current times. It's a battle between Aeschylus and Euripides. Sophocles is out of the mix. First, practical reasons that it wasn't, for reasons we'll see, it wasn't feasible for him to be there, but it was understood, dudes, Sophocles is Beethoven, okay? Let's get over it. Now, who's what, or he's Mozart, who's Handel? You know what I'm saying? Like, who's second best? Who's the guy? And so that says a lot, too. So it's very interesting that Sophocles gets such good either direct or indirect press in ancient Greece. So you're reading the best there is, you guys. This is the Homer of drama. It's understandable why this is used as a key text for Freud, among others, in terms of the psychological connections, because it's so deep, this whole idea of what is revealed, what isn't revealed, what's held back, what is really known, not known, what is maybe even known on a subconscious level and later comes out on a conscious level. And one main symbolic image that is used throughout, dealing with this whole question of ignorance versus knowledge, or vision versus, well, that I gave it away, is this idea of sight and blindness. It goes on throughout. Yeah, how about that at 10:58, I guess it is, with such clues I could not fail to bring my birth to light. All this light imagery, light. You see that all the way through, right? Okay, that is irony for you, because what's going to happen is Tiresias, the blind seer, the prophet, right, comes along and he tells the truth, but he's a blind guy. Oedipus, the guy who doesn't know the truth but claims to know the truth, is the guy with perfect vision. And then what's going to happen? Well, it's not a spoiler because you've read the play already. At the end, he blinds himself. And then guess what? He goes off with Antigone to Colonus, which is covered in the Oedipus Colonus play, or Oedipus Colonus play. And then he becomes this unrecognizably wise guy. Kind of like a Kwai Chang Caine, if anybody knows Kung Fu. Kind of like a total, like Zen dude. And now he's the blind guy, and now he's wise. Now he's no longer under the illusion that he knows things that he doesn't know. So it's very powerful symbolism, this idea between knowing and not knowing, and the knowing is symbolized by seeing, and the not knowing by being. And again, I'm not inventing this. Anybody who the most authoritative interpreters of the play talk about the light and darkness, seeing and not seeing symbolism. It's pretty much the most conspicuous symbolism in the play. Yeah. By the way, you kind of get that in Homer as well. In Book 1, if anybody's familiar with the Iliad, the seer is called, and the seer is blind. Also, supposedly Homer was blind, the poet who sang the Iliad and the Odyssey, and he was inspired by the muse who got her story from Zeus, and so there's a chain of command. And Homer was the blind but extremely wise poet who was the medium for the inspiration that he got from the muse. See what I'm saying? So he's the medium. He had, according to the conceit at the beginning of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and also in Hesiod, in the Theogony and the Works and Days, he had vision only because he was given it by the gods, by the muses in particular. And so his physical blindness not only didn't hamper him, but helped him in the sense that none of his perception diluted the pure message from the gods. You see, it's interesting stuff. And then lastly, don't forget about the Oracle at Delphi and Apollo and him symbolizing light. He's not the sun god, if you ever get on Jeopardy. Helios is the sun god, but he's associated with light and the sun and rationality, reason, clear vision, and things like that. And he is the one who gives the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo at Delphi, the answer to the oracle when people go and ask for answers. So there was already that dichotomy of seeing with your eyes but not seeing anything and being stupid, leading to being punished, and then the punishment ends up ironically kind of being the opposite of a punishment insofar as you value wisdom. Now, same thing with Cassandra. I don't know about you guys. I wouldn't mind knowing everything myself with no one believing in me. Screw them. I know everything. It never occurred to me when I was your age, you reading all this stuff all the time. It's like, oh, that's terrible. Nobody believes you. The older you get, the less you give a shit about how many people believe you if you think you know what's true. Oedipus not only doesn't value them trying to help him save face without knowing they're trying to help him, but also giving them pushback for not for helping. You don't see stuff like this. Let me tell you something. This is new stuff. You don't see stuff like this in Homer. This kind of irony, if you push me, you can find instances of irony. But this is new to tragedy, and most famously to Sophocles. He brings in the third actor after Aeschylus brings in the second. That's what he's probably most famous for. But maybe the second one would be his tragic irony that Aristotle is so fond of. And that is the main reason, as you'll see when I bring in Aristotle next time, or at least one of them, that he considers him to be the greatest of the tragedians. It has to do with the irony, the idea of exactly what we're talking about. Most of what we're talking about today has to do one way or another with the irony. What if he were nothing but an a-hole? Who cares? We'd be rooting for him getting whatever comes to him. We like the guy in the sense that he's doing the best he can. It's not nice to get into road rage and kill people. Let's establish that. That sucks. That's not a nice thing to do. But he's a good king. Everybody loves him, as you'll see with the play. At least they play that out. The whole notion that his citizens love him, and the whole patronizing thing. We were only looking at the negative part of that. And to be honest with you, I'm going to have to kind of go back a little bit to that conversation about the patronization stuff. It's one thing to look at Oedipus with our eyes today, like if a politician talked to us that way, then we would say, screw you, you're not my daddy, But in an ancient Greek context, we can't entirely indict him for what he says at the beginning with this whole children thing, because I hate to say it, there are speeches by extremely, such as Pericles, extremely respected politicians in the real world, Solon, etc., who talk to the Greek citizens in that very manner in a real world context. So that's what historians use to determine how outlandish, if at all, it might be for that to be going on in the play. So that's something definitely to consider. It's not only a matter of what an a. So that doesn't brand him as that's in the good column more than the bad in my sense of the context of ancient Greek culture. So we can't use that as an argument for him being an asshole. On the one hand, we like him, but on the other hand, he did things that definitely deserve punishment, yet on the other hand, for reasons different than what he believed. When we get to Antigone, you guys, what I'm about to say will be true in spades, and that is that we have to, on the one hand, oh gosh, this is what I love about all this Greek stuff, is it's so ambiguous, it's so hard to come up with objective answers to anything, other than like when things happen, and even then there's debate sometimes. But this whole distinction between what goes on within the fictional context of a play and what goes on in the real world is really hard to piece out sometimes. And so when it comes to Creon and what he represents, being the brother of the queen, that for what we understand, that is not entirely an unpowerful thing to be. So, but we just don't know for sure. It depends on. You have to look at particular brothers of people in history that are every once in a while mentioned by Herodotus and Thucydides and Plutarch, etc. But yeah, it's definitely a topic. It's the kind of thing the classicists write articles about. Okay, so we're not going to solve it here, but definitely it's worth pointing out those things, those differences between the play and what we understand of the real world.